everyone. Welcome to part three of the Crush Domestic Violence
You want to talk
series.
like that?
Yeah, we can.
Mhm.
So yeah.
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Yeah, welcome to part three. And tonight we're going to just see what happens. I invited my son. For those of you who are just joining the series, and I was looking for a pen, so I didn't find one. But for those of you who are just joining this series, I am Anika Leonard, and I am the CEO of Priceless Insight. And at Priceless Insight, like I'm really, really interested in having conversations that, a lot of people are not having right now, conversations that basically, really go against, or I don't want to say go against, but like really challenge what we know, or what we think we know about certain topics, right? And so, one of those topics is domestic violence, and you have to go to Alafia's uh, YouTube channel and or Facebook channel and Priceless Insights YouTube and Facebook channel if you want to just like catch yourself up on like where what we've been talking about. But we basically for the first session I gave homage to survivors of domestic violence and those who didn't survive. I talked about like my journey and how like at one point I was like really into the language and the terminology of like using domestic violence, using perpetrator, using words like abuser. And then I found that those things really didn't like speak to me. They didn't speak to my community, and they didn't speak to where I wanted my community to be. You know what I'm saying? Because I know that a lot of us have people in our lives, in our families, in our communities who have caused harm. And like we don't necessarily see them only as the harm that they've caused. Like we see them like that's not just a person who's caused harm, but that's my brother, or that's my son, or that's my dad. Like they have other roles, and they are so much more than the harm that they have caused. And so I know that's a bit controversial to have that kind of viewpoint, but that's literally how those of us in the Black community, and in many other communities, but I'm really focused on the Black community right now. That's the one I'm a part of, and that's the one I want to speak to. But many of us, like that's kind of where we're at. We see the harm that's caused. We do what we can do to kind of intervene and or interrupt it, and sometimes we don't. Sometimes we keep it quiet. We go by that old adage, like what goes on in this house stays in this house, right? And so we have those things show up, and we don't really necessarily know what to do when a person that we love is violent, or a person that we love does the unthinkable, right? We have a lot of conversations about murder suicides and that sort of thing. And so we have not gotten into any of those topics in this series so far. I'm just really unpacking what it means to have uh basically with like the traditional domestic violence learning or teachings. They have this thing called a power and control wheel, and the power and control wheel, it really like just identifies different things that happen in a relationship that like is used to either exert power and control over your partner. And so some of those things are like physical violence, emotional violence, financial violence, sexual abuse, those sorts of things. And so a lot of times what I talked about in my last session, and actually I had Ania Leonard, who is my 27-year-old. Ania came on and talked about, like really what it meant to be parented by a person who had, and that person is me, who had kind of like like I didn't see anything wrong with whooping my kids. Like, I mean, I thought that that's what I was supposed to do, right? Like a lot of people in the generations before us, like it's just normal to whip your kids, right? um I didn't see anything wrong with cussing my kids out. But if you look at the traditional power and control wheel, you see, like verbal abuse, emotional abuse, you see physical abuse. And so Like I've been raising the conversation on what it means to like really look at ourselves and not separate ourselves from those people over there who, like are doing these unspeakable things, right? Like causing harm is just like it's not okay in general, right? Like regardless of who's doing it. um but I think we sometimes turn a blind eye to how we, like ignore our kids sometimes. And if we look at that power and control wheel, like that's considered emotional abuse. If like we don't think about how we whoop our kids, because if it were an adult, another adult, then it's called domestic violence, right? But we don't look at it like that. And I really want to extend the conversation because my goal in this series is not just to well, it's definitely to raise awareness around certain behaviors that we have, and that some of them that we pass off as cultural, and then some of them that we have and we basically, like just don't see anything wrong with it. Like it's what our parents did before us, it's what those who came before us did, and so because of that, it's like it's normal and it's okay. And um I've been really unpacking this, like what it means to be, in this field, or in this in my community, as a person who really wants to prevent and interrupt violence, right? In all of its forms. And that doesn't mean that I'm anti-violent, right? Like I understand that, like if my life is on the line, that if it's either me or you, then I'm not anti-violent, and I'm not advocating for people to just, I'm not advocating for people to not defend themselves if their life is in danger and that sort of thing. I'm talking about like intentionally causing harm to manipulate or control um, another person, that you're in an intimate relationship with, and or that you're in a friendship with. I think that another thing that extends the conversation beyond, like intimate partners, which is what domestic violence really does. It's like, like we're only talking about intimate partners. And then some places and some spaces, they talk about, domestic violence in the context of families, because, like if you are in a household with someone who does some of those same things, then it's also considered domestic violence. Whether it's like a parent and children, or siblings and children, or children and their elderly parents, or people who are developmentally or physically disabled, like they can experience domestic violence at the hands of someone that they are, like cohabitating with. And so we haven't had those kind of conversations, well, a lot of those conversations, and unpacking like what it really means to like look at our behaviors. And so, like I said, like I'm really, really interested in unpacking. And so today, well, let me go back. So last week, Ania joined, and Ania talked about, like what they experienced. And I don't want to speak for Ania, so like I said, go back and watch the video. But as a mother, basically, I really wanted to do the work to repair my relationship with Ania, particularly before Ania went off to college. And so I had to sit with and hear the consequences of my actions, right? Like, because for every action, there is a reaction, right? And the consequences of me cussing my child out and whooping my child and not really valuing my child's voice, like the consequences of that was a damaged relationship. And like, I just, oh, there's so much that I want to say. There's so much that I want to say. And I just think that we really miss the mark sometimes, when we don't value our children, value their voice, value their experiences, and even look at our behaviors um, as a reflection of, who they are, like if Ania and I hadn't had that conversation, that very healing centered conversation where Ania was able to express how they felt around like getting whoopings and, like being cussed out and stuff like that. Like Ania said last week on the live, that Ania, they plan to not come home after college. That would have absolutely devastated me. And I not been self-aware, had I not been aware that the activities or the behaviors that I implemented, that I did while Ania was younger, is the reason why that happened, right? I know that we have a lot of parents today who still cannot and refuse to hear how their behaviors impact their children, and even adult children, because it doesn't just stop. It didn't just stop because Ania is now an adult, and it didn't just stop, because Eric is now an adult. Like my behaviors, my attitudes towards them, all of that impacted the adults that they are today. And like there's some responsibility that I have to take as a parent, and then there's some responsibility that they have to take as the person who experienced it. And also, like they had to be willing to like reconcile and to come to and talk to me, even though like in the past I wasn't, like really open. I couldn't even hear it. Actually, I couldn't even hear um the impact of my behavior on them, like 10 years ago. Like I could, well, I don't want to say 10 years ago, because 10 years ago that's when Ania and I had the conversation. But like 5 years before that, 15 years ago, I couldn't hear. I wouldn't have been able to hear Ania. I was too wrapped up in my own stuff. I was too wrapped up in like finishing college, surviving the nonprofit industrial complex and anti-blackness. And like I was too wrapped up in all of these things, and then trying to be a mother, and then trying to, like just navigate my own history of traumatic experiences and stuff. I ain't have the awareness to be able to say, okay, look, like this is how what you're doing is impacting your children. And I am by no means, um we when we know better, we do better. That's what I will say. When we know better, we do better. I'm not trying to dog anybody. I'm not trying to say that others are not doing the best that they can with what they have. Like I'm not doing that, but I'm saying that like I'm at a point where I know better and I'm going to do better. And a part of that doing better is honoring and recognizing and uplifting the experiences that my children had with me, a person who is in the community, who is, like representing and speaking and uplifting the experiences of Black women, girls, and gender expansive youth. Like if I can't be real and honest about how I showed up, like the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? Like because I can show up, I could be all polished, I could be all beautiful, and I could give you a definition of domestic violence, and I can, like do all of the things that are really performative, in my opinion, right? Like the work, the real work, is when you able to look at these things and see how they show up in your own life, right? And how they show up in the lives of your friend, because like, or friends and family, I should say, because it's not just enough for us to be like, okay, well, like this happened, and like I'm sorry, we gonna get over it. um it's not enough. It's not enough to just like expect people to get over it. It's not enough to think that are harmed and not have a lasting impact. And we have no idea the amount of weight that we can take off our children when they find out that, like, no, like it wasn't about you. Like when I was like coming home from work and didn't have space for you, it wasn't because I didn't love you. It wasn't because I didn't value you. When you were trying to tell me about, what was going on in school, it wasn't that I didn't like I didn't appreciate you telling me about your day. Like, I mean, it's like those are the things that you want as a parent. And sometimes you just don't have space for it. And sometimes, and most times, that has nothing to do with your children, and all of this is a very relevant conversation when we're talking about like domestic violence and domestic violence awareness month, because some of the reasons why we aren't able to be present is because we haven't dealt with some of the trauma that we've experienced back then. And some of it is not domestic violence. Some of it could be community violence. Some of it could be sexual violence. It could be a number of different reasons why we are unable to show up. But the thing is that we're not going to be able to show up for our children unless we're able to show up for ourselves. And so I wanted to, like just create space for us to show up for ourselves and invite other mothers, particularly other Black mothers, to join me in showing up for ourselves so that we can, like go back and have those healing conversations with our children if we need to, like if there's space to, while we still have a chance, because they're never too old to hear I'm sorry. They're never too old. And just because you have that conversation with them once, doesn't mean that it's not going to come back up again. And we need to be able to hold the emotions that they have around it, because um just like sometimes we want to hear, certain things from our parents, like they want to hear certain things from us, and it may take several conversations for us to be able to get to that thing, like there has to be trust that's built. Like Ania and I had to prove to Ania that I was going to hear them, hear Ania and not punish Ania for saying what they said or feeling how they felt, like there's a certain amount of trust that needs to be established first, because like I mean parents are human, parents are human too. And sometimes, like you may read something or hear something, or think that you're ready to have this conversation, and then like next thing you know, like you done heard some stuff about you that you don't like, and now it's reading to the child like, oh no, I made my mom mad, or I made my dad mad, or I made my parent or my guardian mad, and now like they're mad at me, or they don't want to have this conversation. And it could be a million things that are going on, but we we human, we reckon that we need to recognize that, right? um Create space for our humanity, because sometimes our kids don't see our humanity, but that is not an excuse to continue being harmful. You can't shut down a conversation and be like, oh, I'm human, and so I have this reaction, and now you're not accountable for your behaviors. No, there's a reconciliation that has to happen, and that includes being responsible and accountable for the things that you have done that have harmed people, including your children, and especially your children, right? And so for me, we had to have several conversations, and in those conversations more and more things came out. Like last week, like I said, I didn't know that Ania was planning to not come home because of me, because of my parenting, right? Because of what I did. I did not know that my child was willing to walk away from me. And I know that we will have a lot of parents who were like, oh, my kids don't visit, my kids don't do this, and my kids don't do that. But we don't think about why. We don't look at, like, how have you shut them down? How have you denied them the wholeness of who they are? You know what I'm saying? Is it that you only love certain parts of your child? Because that could be why they don't, come around or want to be around, or speak their piece, or like invite you into their lives. Like it's so many different things, and I'm just really, 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 y'all, I'm just doing my best to show up differently, to because I don't, man, I swear, I don't want I want a lasting relationship with my children. I want a loving relationship with my children. I want my children to be able to come to me at any age and tell me anything that is going on within their lives, and know that their mom has their back. I want them to know that, like even though I made mistakes and I'm not perfect, that I'm going to still try, and I'm going to fight for our relationship to continue to grow and to continue to progress. And I'm going to fight and like take care of myself and continue to heal myself, so that I can be present for whatever comes up for them that needs to heal, like, and they need to see that healing modeled in their parents. Like they need to see that. You have no idea how important it is to see that healing, and to know that there's space for that, um to know that there's space for that in our lives. So I I don't know, I think it's just really important. It's really important for us to start healing, and for us to start being accountable for some of our behaviors. And in my announcement for tonight, I'm like, like I'm not for everybody. These are my views and opinions. Everybody don't have to like them. Some people are not going to like the fact that I'm talking about Domestic Violence Awareness Month, but I'm pointing to some behaviors that I've had. Some people are going to be like, oh, well, that's victim blaming, or that's, and like there's a point where we got to take responsibility for our actions. There's a point where um in the relationship, either when the abuse first started, or when you first noticed, like there's a point when we betray ourselves. There was a point I could look back and see that there was a point where I betrayed myself, where I decided that I was going to continue and receive less than what I deserve. There was a point where I decided that. There was a point where I decided that I was going to cause harm to me, to somebody, because I didn't like the way they did something, or I didn't like I got to be completely honest and straight up about that. So next week, so we talked about me and my role as a parent, right? And like I said, I invited Eric, who is my 26-year-old son. I invited him here today to, like, just if he wanted the opportunity and the platform to talk about how my actions have impacted him, he had the platform here. It is always going to be open to him. But next week I want to talk about my role in like what is considered the anti-gender based violence movement, or the gender justice movement. Like, it's so many different names for it. But like, I want to talk about like how and why it is so important for me to do this work and to unpack some harmful behaviors. I want to talk about, like, yeah, professional Anika, and how Anika got to that place, because I have not always been professional, Anika. And hell, I'm halfway professional now. I'm gonna just be honest about it. I'm halfway professional now. I'm really, like, really more interested in being in community and being rooted in community than I am in upholding the white supremacist patriarchal standards of professionalism. Like, I give no fucks about that, like, at all, for real, for real. Like, I'm more interested in like creating real conversations in our community so that we can move forward and heal together, instead of, like, like, just showing up and pretending like everything is okay. Like, I'm not going to show up in a space and not address the things that need to be addressed. Pretty much, like my organization is Priceless Insight. The insight is INCITE. And that basically means, like, we ready for the action. Like, this is what it's about, the action behind why we're doing what we're doing and how we're doing it, and being accountable, like being accountable for it. So yeah, I'm gonna talk about the rest of my professional road, and this relationship that I have with causing harm. I want to talk a little bit about some experiences with intimate partners where I've been harmed, but then also where I've caused harm, which I alluded to a little bit today. But we gonna get into it next week, because I think it's important to have these conversations. Like, I'm not perfect by any means, by no means, but I have learned a lot from the experiences that I've had. And so I'm not gonna brag about them. I'm gonna discuss them as a point of a learning, like a point of learning for us all, right? Like I learned something from what I've experienced, and I think that other people can too. So please join us next week. You can find information about my organization by just, like, Googling us, Priceless Insight LLC. You can go to our website, www.pricelessinsight.org. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, even though we don't like tweet a lot or whatever, but you can find us on those different social media platforms. And thank you to our partners at Alafia for hosting us and this domestic violence series. And we will see you next week. Thank you for joining us. Please leave us some comments. Let us know if you basically what you think and what you can add to this conversation. See you all next week. Thank you.